My wife loves hexagons. In fact, it is her favorite shape. So I wanted to see if I could create a simple shelving unit using only hexagons. I think she'll love it, so let's do it. Here's a quick drawing that I came up with just to give you an idea what I'm aiming for. Since hexagons have 6 sides, I figured I'm going to come up with 6 of them and combine them together, probably in a shape similar to this. I'm going to try to make each of these sides about 7 inches across, and that should give me about 11 inches on the inside for her to put her stuff. Now I've seen some other people make some of these out of plywood, but I actually got a secret. I really don't like cutting down plywood. And if you look around my shop, it might be a little bit hard to see, but it's barely over 8 feet wide. So trying to move around plywood makes it really difficult, especially with stuff hanging on the walls. And that primarily leaves me with cutting it down on the floor, which the older I get, the less I want to do. So if I'm not going to use plywood, then what's my next best option? This is a 1x8x6, and if I buy 6 of these, that means I don't have to get up and down 100 times off the floor to cut plywood? Well, wait. How much in price is that? Well, 6 of these was only going to cost about $5 more than a price of a big sheet of plywood. $5, save my knees. I call that a win. Now I want the depth of each of these shelves to be about 11 inches. So I need to cut 6 pieces off of each of these boards, and being at 6 feet long, that can be a little bit difficult to start. But the good thing is, since I'm going to have a little bit of wood left over, I believe I'm just going to cut all of these right in half, and that way I only have to work with a 3-foot section instead of a 6-foot section. And to make all these initial cuts, I'm going to use my crosscut sled on my table saw to minimize any tear out and to make sure everything is as 90 degrees as possible. And now that I laid these 6-foot boards out, you can see how small my shop really is. And that's why I don't like cutting plywood in here. I then measured out 11 inches on my sled and I put a stop block in place because I have to make a bunch of repeated cuts and I want them all to be exact. Now I have 36 pieces all at 11 inches long, and it's time to start cutting the angles on the sides here so that we can start fitting them all together. The only tricky part is if I mess up one angle, or if that angle is not exact, then literally I've messed up an entire section. So I'm going to take some of these cutoffs that I have, and I'm actually going to make a test piece. Looking at these, you can tell they are all different sizes, and well, some are definitely in better condition than the others. So I'm going to pick out 6 of the best and we'll work with those. After organizing all of the best pieces and finding the smallest one of the bunch, I'm going to cut this down to 2 3/4, followed by these 5. I then tilted the blade to 30 degrees. We're going to make our test cuts. After cutting both sides of each one, we're placing the small side facing down. I'm going to run some tape across these so we can fold it together and see how accurate we really are. Now I flip these upside down. Let's see if we can roll them together. It is a little tight. I think that's partly due to the tape. And if I force these together like they would be if I clamped them, there's a hairline crack there. You may or may not be able to see it, but overall, I think it'll work. It's now time to cut out the sides on our main pieces, but we need to run through them and check for knots and imperfections first. And when possible, you want to hide those imperfections on the inside of the hexagon. But in this case, I actually was hoping to use this as an exterior piece. So this knot, this little imperfection here, is actually going to go to the intersection of where I have 3 hexagons, so you should never see it. After cutting 36 of these, or actually 72 sides, it does take a little bit of time, but I think we're ready for glue up. I've lined these up as best I could like I did with the other pieces, and I'm using a level to try and keep them as straight as possible. And now I'm going to tape them up similar to what I did before, but also going down each seam. Then we gotta try and flip all these over without losing any of that tape connection. Something like that. Yes. My next step is usually to start gluing up all the seams, but I want to try something I've never tried before. I've been told that if you take some more painter's tape and you line it along the inside edge of your seam, as the glue squeezes out, it'll get on your tape and not on your wood, making it a lot easier to remove. So let's give that a shot. Just want to give you a heads up, if you try this process, you're going to use a lot of tape. So if you can get the painter's tape that's a little bit thinner, that way you're not wasting it on the more expensive stuff. Unfortunately, that's all I have. I ended up using some ratchet straps on these to kind of hold everything together so they don't fall apart. I do have a feeling that I'll probably have to fill in some gaps later, but overall, I'm pleased. And there's a good example of how the tape saved me from having to remove a ton of glue later. You know how sometimes you underestimate what you're doing? Well, that's what I did in this project. I needed a place to store these while they dry. So I got 2 here, I got 1 over there, 2 over there, 1 over there, and well, I have very little working room left. So if you're gonna do this, be prepared that you need a place to store these as they dry. And after giving these a few hours, I'm starting to take the tape off, but since this is pine, I gotta be real gentle and just pull it off at a slow fashion. Otherwise, I'll pull some of the fibers off and it just won't look right and will take a lot more sanding. So just be gentle with it. Now, a big question I had was, will the inside tape actually work keeping the glue off of the corners? So as you can see, there's some glue here and here. Let's peel this off and see if it'll actually work. Oh, the tape is starting to tear. Well, it helps some, but I'm telling you right now, the tape is starting to tear. I can feel some of it tearing, so that might be a challenge right there. Here are the results. There's a little blue tape there, a little blue tape here, and it might be hard to see, but right back here, there is some glue squeeze out that came out underneath the tape. So would I recommend this process? Well, probably not. It really just depends on your project. For example, if I was to do this over again, instead of using the tape, I would put everything together and just take a damp cloth and wipe away the glue. I think it would just be easier. Then moving to the outside, you'll notice that on a couple of these corners here, they didn't fully line up and I got a little bit of a crack. Let me show you how I'm gonna fix that. I'm going to use a glue called Speed Set by Type Bond. Now this stuff is supposed to dry a lot faster than your standard wood glue, but still be just as strong. So I'm gonna take a little bit, put it on my finger, wipe it into the crack, and then I'm gonna take some sandpaper and I'm gonna sand on each side just enough to create a good layer of dust that'll embed itself into that glue and should work well. And here's a crack that I've already completed. In fact, this crack was larger than the last one that you just saw. And after letting it dry, you'll notice that it is nearly invisible. You can tell there's still something there, but it's not nearly as bad as it was. Next up is sanding, and I wanted to get these to about 95% finished. That way, once I have everything fully assembled, it doesn't take a whole lot of work just to add those finishing touches. Also, I recommend doing it with a flat hand sander like this so we don't accidentally round over the edges. I finally got them all sanded, and that was a lot of work. But, you know, that's part of the fun we get when we're trying to make stuff for ourselves. Now, it's time for assembly, but I did find one problem. Let me show you. If you look here right on the end, you'll notice that both of these pieces seem to be warped. See how much it moves back and forth? So I'm gonna have to rotate these to find the ones that have the least amount of warp in them, and hopefully when I glue them and clamp them, they'll stay down. Now I'm not sure if this is the smartest, but I think I'm gonna try and connect these or glue these up while laying on their backs, at least initially. Glue 2 of them up, clamp them right here on the front, then flip them over and clamp them on the back. And then hopefully once those are all connected, connect them all together. Let's see if it'll work. Here's a little tip I just learned. When you're trying to glue up pieces of wood, a lot of times it's going to move around on you. Some people say put a little salt in it. Some say grab some sawdust and put in it. I just learned if you take some real coarse sandpaper and just gently rub them together over your glue, some of that little coarse grit's going to fall in there and it's going to hold that wood and keep it from moving around. And after connecting everything in the doubles, went ahead and connected the whole unit together. But I do have to mention that clamping these two together and these two together were about the hardest I've ever had to clamp stuff together, because once you clamped on one corner, one side, the wood, since it's warped, wanted to twist out, making it really difficult to clamp on the other. So I had to do this in stages by holding both of these together in the center and then adding the 4 outer clamps, which then I clamped down really hard to squeeze and just pull it all together. And not only did I have to clamp them in the front, but I had to clamp them in the back, otherwise it'd have been some major gaps. And there's the final result. Pretty close to the picture, wouldn't you think? I think so. But I do believe it's missing something. Now I know these are shelves by themselves, but wouldn't it be really cool if some of these kind of had like a double layer? You know, that way you could split some stuff up if you need to. So I purchased another 1x8 and cut it down so that I can have 3 shelves that'll fit in our hexagons. The width of these are about 12.5 inches wide at the top, and each side has a 30-degree angle. I also sanded down each of the sides, making this really easy to just slide into place. And with those extra shelves in place, I think it really upgraded the appearance. At this point, I'd strongly suggest adding some type of a top coat or a finish, maybe a urethane or an oil or even paint. It just depends on what you want to use, because if you don't, these will quickly start to discolor as oils from your hand touch it. But for me, I'm actually going to have to pause on this project because this is a Christmas gift for the wife, and I want her to have say in exactly the color or finish that we use. So at this point, I'd love to hear from you. Do you have any other suggestions to make this better? Or maybe just ideas to improve the process? Please put those in the comments. You'll help out everybody else who watches this video. Now it's time for you to get out in your shop and have fun building.